Hello and welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break. Um, just a reminder, we've been listening to music in between the breaks from Gordon Kowang, I think it is from Melbourne, and his music is available from Bandcamp. He's a South Sudanese musician and he records and writes his music. And yeah, please go out and support it. Once again, I'm Kween G. I've been hosting you for the last couple of days, and thanks to Refugee Council of Australia and the Whitlam Institute for putting this conference on and just making it all happen online so beautifully and magically. And the conversations have been really enticing. And so right now is our closing session. Gordon Kowang, that's right, Gordon Kowang Bandcamp. Adama has just put the link in the chat box for you all. So this is a closing session. Please join us as we reflect on the important issues raised during the last 2 days and as we look ahead. I'd like to start by introducing our keynote speaker, Deng Thiak Adut, who will be addressing the theme of rebuilding, resilience and innovation for this year's conference. Deng is an inspirational defense lawyer, community leader, refugee advocate. He's a Sudanese child soldier turned Western Sydney lawyer and refugee advocate whose harrowing tale of his personal journey as a refugee has evoked strong emotions among Australians. Born in South Sudan in 1984, one of 8 children, Deng was conscripted as a boy soldier at just the age of 6 before going to war when he was 10. So instead of playing games and singing children's songs, he was learning war songs and was taught to love death of others. He escaped the army in 1995 and arrived in Australia as a 14-year-old refugee in 98. After teaching himself to read, write, and speak English, Deng won a scholarship to study law at the University of Western Sydney in 2005 and graduated with a Bachelor of Law in 2010. He later obtained his master's degree in law at the University of Wollongong. Please help me by joining us with Deng. And also like to introduce the rest of the panel. We also have Paul Power and Kelly Nicholls and Rebecca Eckard. Just a reminder, at the end of the sessions, we're still taking the feedback from everybody. So if you please give your feedback and you'll go into the running to win that amazing cookbook. And we'll just wait for Deng to come on.
Am I on a mute?
Yes, my brother, how are you? You're on, we can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, thank you very much.
You.
I'm sorry, I was about to go crazy. Yeah. I was about to go crazy, yeah.
Yeah, his video is not working, but we can hear you.
You can hear me, that's the most important thing. Thank you very much for having me. Look, where do I begin? Everyone know my story, how I came to Australia, but nobody know my story while I'm living in Australia. And of course, most refugee like myself and Kween and I, and a lot of people, a lot of refugee, they basically here in Australia, but they here in their bodies, they're not here in their mind. So I think it is important to pause there and listen to what your mind is telling you, rather than me actually try to articulate the importance of this subject. I came here without my mother, without my rest of the family, extended family, besides my brother John Achwick, who was then Australian citizen until he was expected about a lot of racism in this country, and I still stand up for it. I haven't given up fighting to stop racism, and that is the difference between a refugee and someone who's born and knowing nothing about spending 20 years or 15 years in a refugee camps or a place where he doesn't know is a home. That's a big difference. So having lived here for a long time, I'm just going to give you a little bit of reflection about coronavirus, what it does, and I'll start as an example. I'm not gonna go anywhere. I'm not going to talk about other people's businesses because this is my business. This is my personal experience. And I have to speak for my personal experience in order for you guys to understand what impact it had on me. I was born with 8 siblings. My father at 43, I'm number 42. 17 of my brothers died during the war. And I have to say the word war clearly so that you understand what I'm talking about, because it seemed like we have declared coronavirus as a war, but we haven't caught a war criminal. So let me make myself clear. For every crime, I stood up and put my life on the line, admitting nearly every single crime that I have committed as a human being. It's all in my book. I rolled my head in it. As a Sudanese, stand up for my people and people of Greater Australia and people in the whole world, and actually telling you the bad things about war, warning each of every single of you. But it seemed like you are missing my story, didn't click to your ears. Now we're dealing with another war called coronavirus, who kill millions. It killed millions of people, but he's still forgetting it's a war. But you haven't seen no war criminal coming before you and admit besides myself. Don't you feel lucky to be actually here to actually revisit this story again? I think you're lucky because I'm still alive. Coronavirus. How did I deal with it? First, my mother passed away, and this is the moral story, and that I have to basically set the ground for it. What life do we have to deal with as a refugee on a personal level so somebody else can translate it? Because I don't speak for everyone. I speak for something that actually dear to me, something that affected me. So here we go. My mother passed away on 13, sorry, she was buried on the 13th of November, 2020. The 13th is the day she was buried. She was born on 11th of November. She died on November 11th, so I keep confusing the two things because my daughter was born on 11th of November. My mother passed away on 11th of November, and then she was buried on 13th of November. 13th of July happened to be the day that I was born. So confusing these numbers. So just bear with me. So here's the message that I'm telling you. As a Sudanese man, I have learned a story about the impact of coronavirus, what it does to a person, especially a person who was deprived of his childhood, a person who want to pick up or want to catch up or want to know about his mother or want to know about something that he doesn't know, or want to cultivate love, which he didn't have initially because I was a soldier. It's different between a man that is designed to kill a weapon, like coronavirus is a weapon. Like I just keep telling you, it's a weapon. It's a weapon. I was just another weapon like coronavirus. It's just that I stopped. But these men haven't stopped killing you. Now, when I went and visited my own mother, I spent days in a detention center, call it coronavirus center, just to go and visit my mother, to go and see her grave. That a handle that a refugee have, you don't have that. That a handle that somebody who basically robbed nearly of everything and he didn't care about anything else. Nothing could ever stop me from leaving Australia to go and see my mother body, or even to visit her grave. Nothing could have stopped me from doing that. But Australia stopped me. Do you imagine what it cost to a mind of a man that was already a refugee, a child soldier, equipped with nearly all the injuries you could ever imagine that I don't play with. And nearly Australia can go open every single page in a book and see whether Deng Adut have punched somebody in the face in this country. See Deng Adut have actually insulted somebody in this country. See that I have actually insulted a child, or a child have stopped in the street and look at me and ask me a question, and I actually turn my face and say, no, I don't know. No, I never done that. But here it is, Australia detained me. I went back, came and see my mother, and I have to basically obey the rules, the laws that everybody is supposed to obey. That's important, to stay away, to keep yourself clean from touching things. Yes, which I obey, I came back healthy. But then I went into a quarantine. I had a pneumonia. In pneumonia that nearly took my life. All right, but just imagine being accused, you are in a quarantine and you are told by a doctor that he doesn't know or she doesn't know what you're sick of besides pneumonia. But she's most interested in knowing other disease that I may have acquired in Africa. Now, this is the blame of game of making sure that no disease ever come out of Africa, by the way. We hear about it, we read about it. It's unindigenous to Africa. Every single disease is discovered by somebody else. But now I have to go through it. I was accused of HIV. They went through their tests. I didn't have it. Tuberculosis, I didn't have it. Now I had pneumonia, but I have to go through that. It's a process that nearly every Black human being can actually agree with me that it is not all right. It's quite clear. It's a racist as it is. But you move on to tell me that you don't know what it is. It could be something, could be something. And I pause there and I say, no, you can't tell me it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. When you don't know nothing about anything, you should pause at least and stop and find your way out. That's how I found my way out to this country. Nobody actually understood how I got myself here. You gotta listen, people. You gotta listen. And I'm speaking to a place that made me to still have such a voice today. Now, if you accuse me of age, you accuse me of nearly every single disease, and this is Deng Adut in front of you. I'm open, 110%. I can give, you can go ahead, I open my public record, and you go, people that go that far. To me, as the person that behave himself, I know when I walk out of my house, I know the purpose I'm going to get a milk, or I'm going to get a sugar. I don't have a zigzag. If I'm going out to work, I go to work. I know my purpose on this earth. That's what I tried to teach my daughter. But I nearly died during the coronavirus. And I nearly died because, not because I was not Australian enough, it's because my color of the skin, it seemed to be the barrier of what actually stopped the doctors from looking at me. And I must be open to you. I'm speaking to my people from University of Western Sydney. The Perth hospital, that's exactly what they did to me. We can open the record under freedom of speech. You can do that because I put you all on notice because you only want to hear a story from a man himself, but you don't want to do the background check. Now I give you a leeway. You can ask me for this information, but I'll give you that. That is the suffering of a refugee they have. We have anxiety. I was broken. I have no mother. Just think about it. But that was the only thing that was holding me to this world. She's the key for a hope for me to even love a child, even to love a woman. But my attempt for me to reconnect with the coronavirus took that away from me. But then to have some sort of idea that the compassion should even apply to me. Because I think my compassion, somebody have to come up and actually challenge my compassion generally, because I think I said freely in terms of compassion that I have nothing against human being on this planet, that I would do anything for any man or for any child, for anybody that is suffering on this earth. But then compassion, that's what I was asking. Just give me a chance. Just give me a chance. But I was treated like a criminal. Now, I have ladies, small stories that were because of me as Deng. But in terms of other people, yes, there are stories. I'm still a lawyer. I'm still practicing it on daily basis. You see the crime, the hate crime against Asian is something that is actually remote from Australia. Of course, Australians were the first people to actually demonize Asian to be the carrier of the coronavirus when they couldn't point a single doctor that actually caused it. But then we went ahead and demonized nearly 100% of our people, of our good people. What I'm saying is, as a refugee, there's a lot of baggage being counted against me, things that are bad. Most of you expect me to be actually better, doing better. But how could I do better than yourself, if you're not doing any better? So, as a graduate, as alumni, as that family called Western Sydney is where I grew up from, where I came up from, I understand the equality. And then it is equally important that we can speak about those people that their voices cannot be heard because coronavirus now, all you hear now is Dr. Anthony Fauci and our prime minister and our premier, which none of them are not even our experts. They don't even know much about it. They actually finding the way out. But just think about somebody who doesn't know English at least, whose English is third or fourth or sixth or seventh language. There is a gap here we cannot close, people. The gap is too wide. It's getting too bigger. It was yesterday when the trillionaire, the first trillionaire just went up in the sky and flew all the way. But there are people dying from coronavirus. People not even getting food. You see, it's getting worse for a refugee. It's not getting any better. If anybody was actually thinking twice about it, no, I say no, it's getting worse. We become prisoners within the system. And if anything else, that is worse that I can say for those who can hear me. It's unlikely now that the refugee are not. If they are to be in hospital or to be in detention, you think that this government will actually treat them from an infection from coronavirus? I put my money on it. No such a conscious minister, no conscious man in this country that can actually do that. No conscious woman who can actually take a refugee from a detention center they are now and actually take them to a medical center for treatment, other than for their own personal purpose. I'm just saying that is true because I can open nearly every single page in my book in order to tell you what cases I'm dealing with. Yes, there are people who are sick in a detention center that this government is not doing anything about them. And it's too far from my eyes, because my eyes can, my mask, my telephone is working. I'm still there in person. So all I'm saying to you is that Australia is not doing anything about a refugee. The refugees are simply the product of what they were from the very beginning. The victim.
Deng, it's Rebecca Eckard here from the Refugee Council. You've raised so many important points, and I think your firsthand experience with the people you're working with, your clients that are in immigration detention, and the health conditions that people are facing, and the consequences of COVID-19, meaning that people, if they go to a medical appointment now, have to be put into isolation automatically, even if there is little to no risk of them contracting it. It's such an important point. I wonder if one of the things we've been talking about throughout this conference, and even though we're still very much in the midst of COVID, is looking at some of the work, particularly that communities have done in responding to COVID. I wonder if you've seen any positive examples in your work, in the people that you work with in your community, or that you've experienced as a result of COVID, of people having to respond because the government hasn't responded. So they've had to really come up with their own initiative.
Well, look, like I said, I came back from Africa to go and bury my mother and I spent total 19 days in hospital, by the way, in Perth. And just to tell you that if COVID-19 is a disease, I would call him a Hitler. It's the only first disease that has actually let your loved one, who actually let your loved one deserted you, is a disease where if you love your face, you can't touch your own face. And for me to even reach the government, which is artificial, where I'm standing, it's unimaginable for me to even think about the government is actually on a legitimate basis to actually save any of these people from this disaster, which is a man-made disaster. And I made it clear, coronavirus doesn't know formula, doesn't know mathematics. It's simple mathematics. And I am from Western Sydney. I came here, couldn't read and write. And any man here who could challenge me on this end and say that I could not write the same program, it's actually absolute bullshit. Okay, no coronavirus, no manifest, nobody, even who created malaria, has actually been brought before the court of law for a crime. All I'm saying to you is, our communities today, as you see, they are actually in completely locked down, especially Sudanese communities in Sydney is in totally lockdown. It's nothing to do with the government. It's something to do with those people who goes there, who visit houses, despite the fact that the government said, no, don't do it. And there's people that say that, no, you got to take this step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because the television seems to be the way the government try to convey their message. How do you convey the message to people that cannot read and write after danger of this coronavirus? So especially for my community, which is the youngest community, who is not environment, the only solution from very beginning, and I had voiced it from very beginning, is that you stay inside the house, isolate yourself as a key. If you can't isolate yourself, and then you wear a mask, okay? Because all this gambling game of taking vaccine, it's a gambling game. And of course, they're all gambling with our life, and that's the key. My community had much injuries they had. So the solution for me that I've been doing it myself, I've been doing it personally, okay? It's a word of mouth. You drag yourself up. I'm in my house because I'm not wearing a mask, but there's no single day that if I had a free hour, that I don't actually visit a family and tell them, wear a mask, clean yourself up. It becomes individual responsibility because there's no way that I can actually convince, using the word of the government, the minister or whatever, to actually convince my community through their own tongue that it's actually, this thing is dangerous, okay? It is a problem. No, there are programs that have been done. There's people speak in Dinka, and of course, beautifully, the singer, the first singer that was singing there, was singing in Dinka, is speaking in English, but basically you can pick up the sound, you can tell it's from Dinka, 110%. So there's nothing that we cannot pick in that regard. But all I can say, no, our community is left away, it's left behind, and it is a problem that is actually going to face us. If we ever get over this, coronavirus, and then there is a lot of work to be done in this community. That's what I think.
Thank you so much for those reflections. And I think, yeah, there is a lot more work to be done, as you noted. And I think there's also a lot to reflect on of what has, as you said, how communities have come together and taken on the onus themselves to find ways to be safe. So thank you so much, Deng. We're actually now going to move through for some reflections about the past few days and some discussions. And we also want to include all of you, as our CEO, Paul Power, said earlier this morning. We'd really encourage everyone to get onto the Q&A section and reflect on something that you've learned, an insight, something that was surprising to you, something that you want to learn more about. And yeah, we'd really welcome people to start popping those into the Q&A. And it's okay if it's just statements, you don't have to put in just questions. If it's all right, Kween, I was just going to, just introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Eckard, everyone, sorry. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Refugee Council, and was going to hand over to my colleague Kelly first to actually start some of those reflections, as we've been, talking throughout the week and doing some of the side events, and really feels like there's a lot of exciting times ahead. So Kelly?
Thanks, Rebecca, and hi everyone. Lovely to see you all. My name is Kelly. I'm the Director of Strategy, Communications and Fundraising at RCOA, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you from, the Gadigal people, and pay my respect to the elders past and present. I don't know about you, but I am reaching today the end of the conference and feeling very clearly that we have an opportunity right now, an opportunity to reframe the way that not only the government, but people in general perceive refugees. And I'm quite excited about that. As we discussed, I think it was discussed so poignantly at yesterday's plenary session, for decades now, refugees have been perceived as like poor victims, and they've been defined by this victimhood, by their trauma and their perceived vulnerability. And that's, I would say, at best. At worst, they've been seen as a threat to our country's security, to our economy, to our jobs. As was discussed in this morning's plenary, this is a trend that sadly that we're seeing globally. And as one of the speakers said, so on the mark, when we reframe refugees as from people who have had experience of being at risk to being a risk to our country, we strip them of their humanity, and that is what makes it easy to strip them of their rights. I've long reflected on how in my country, Australians tend to have a problem with empathy, to be frank. I feel like there's a tendency of people with very good intentions to respond with sympathy. But sympathy by its very nature creates distance, and it tends to create paternalistic kind of responses to problems. And this was highlighted really beautifully, I thought, in yesterday's discussion on race, power and privilege, where they talked about the savior mentality. And this whole idea of sympathy, the other, like the poor them, I think it was particularly impacted by the discussion at the start of yesterday, where they talked about that not only is the problem the framing of refugees by the government, the media, etc., which focus on them as victims and their vulnerability, but the whole entire system, as I think it was Deng said so well, incentivizes refugees to have to identify as such. So it's a competition for extremely limited resources of support, and only those who are perceived to be at the most vulnerable, like the most vulnerable side of the spectrum, have any chance of accessing some meager support. But that is the exact point where I think that we have an opportunity right now to change. So COVID has really shown us that how inherently interconnected all of us are. So the actions of any one person, be they positive or negative, has a ripple effect across the community, and indeed it can across the country. And this is challenging this competitive versus collaborative nature. And I think, and I hope, it's an invitation to move to the latter, to collaboration. And just like the bushfires that came before for many Australians, it's shown us that any of us at any moment can have an experience of vulnerability, but we're not defined by that. And indeed, challenge by its very nature can be a catalyst for enormous growth. And that's something that I've seen over and over again that refugees exemplify. That experience, or in reality, numerous ongoing experiences of trauma, persecution, etc., can lead to people to bringing out this incredible resilience, courage, ingenuity, determination, focus on community and helping others, leadership, etc. And those are the very qualities that our country, and indeed our world, needs right now as we're coping with COVID and going forward. And so I think that refugees have these exact qualities that we so desperately need. And our job for all of us is, how do we use this moment as a reframing opportunity? And maybe I've got my comms lens on. I could call it, remarketing. But right now, as borders, just talking practically as well, as borders remain largely closed, there remains a challenge of entry. People are still getting in, but it's a challenge. There are key sectors of the Australian economy that are struggling due to labour shortages, such as agriculture, construction, health and aged care. And as a result, the government needs everyone in the country to be fully contributing. And so in light of that, we have this perfect opportunity to present win-win proposals that, while still acknowledging the experience of vulnerability and trauma that refugees have, and people seeking asylum experience and are experiencing, they don't define them by those. Instead, they focus on their resilience, their courage, their resourcefulness, determination, and leadership that they have developed by those experiences. And this would then focus on not just how to support victims, but rather how to support people to be able to fully contribute to their communities, to their industry, to their sector, and to the country, and would provide the kind of support that people need in order to do that. Support such as the stability of being with their family, education, etc. So in that way, I would see this great opportunities where refugees could become how they absolutely should be, and how all of us see the highly valuable members of our community. So obviously a key kind of tenet of any such proposal is that it has to be led by refugees, as we've heard throughout this conference, and this conference itself has really epitomized. But also I think, we need to challenge ourselves. we need to move, and I, include myself in this, we need to move beyond any frames that we use of vulnerability and, even some uses of human rights discourse and so forth. And we need to focus on empowering solutions like that was discussed yesterday or today's, I think it was yesterday's TPV Chev session, which was really practical and brilliant. And so solutions that provide a win for refugee communities and for the government, and that focus on people as the characteristics that we so need as a country and a globe right now. And I think that if we're willing to do this, then right now we have a really amazing opportunity. And I look forward to working with all of you in whatever capacity on that. So thank you so much. And I'll hand over back now to Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I agree. I'm quite excited by all of that. And I also would like to acknowledge that I'm calling or joining today from Bunyarong land. And I wanted to, since it is NAIDOC week, we've been talking about it a lot through the conference, but we've been celebrating personally at my home and sharing the heart of the nation, reading to my young child. And this is what they do at the school. And they say, this is the land, this is the sky, here are my friends, and here am I. We would like to thank the Bunyarong people for the land on which we learn and play. And that's something they do every day. And they talk about the First Peoples of Australia and how this is their land and it always has been. And this is a public school, and I think we have to make more progress in the work that we do in truth telling and steps towards reconciliation and treaty. And I think that I'm excited by the work happening with our younger generation as well. Something that I'm very grateful about, and I think it's been answered in the question, and I will alleviate any fears, is that we will have access to the recorded sessions, because like many of you, I was struggling with wanting to go to multiple parallel sessions. As it's been mentioned, we just need a few days to get all of the recordings sorted, but you will get an email through your registration to be able to visit the virtual hub again and see some of those recorded sessions. So please don't despair. Many of us at the Refugee Council feel the same way and want to see the other sessions we weren't able to attend. I guess my biggest reflection over these days is that I'm reminded again that the tone, depth, and richness of the conversation changes when people with lived experience of forced migration are leading the discussions. And that's the way it should be. I'm grateful for all of the participation and commitment they've made this week, but also for the past several months in developing and planning the conference. After these past few days, my greatest feeling is that I want to delve into even more. I want more in-depth discussion and action in relation to race, power, and privilege. I want to do better, both personally and professionally, in centering the voices, ideas, and decisions of people living through the cruel policies and laws in Australia and beyond. And I also want to explore more ways for all of us to connect regularly to actually put into action the changes we have to create ourselves. I think as a sector, we are often looking to the government, so local, state, but especially the federal government, for the change that we want to see. While it is clear that the government does hold most of the power and still needs to be held accountable, a clear issue that I think has come out of many of the conference sessions this week has been that we need to change the systems that we operate in. So that as both individuals and as groups and also as organizations. I believe some of these changes are possible at a local level and are very much within reach. When refugee-led groups are telling us that they need a different approach from the sector NGOs and agencies, then we must listen, and we need to work together with them to actively find ways to change up what we are doing. When people of color share their experiences of microaggressions and then blatant racism and systemic racism, we must listen openly and then without defensiveness. When LGBTQ+ groups remind us that we need to be actively engaging people and training our staff, then we must make our services accessible and book their training. When we heard from our international colleagues this morning about the global situation, it can become overwhelming and distressing. And yet I felt that there are clear signs of hope, and better still, clear actions for all of us to take. One aspect of the Refugee Alternatives conferences that I think is exceptional is our collective ability to not only state the problem, we're all very good at that usually, but also I think we've taken it to the next level. We're very good at discussing ways to overcome those problems and those obstacles for us to make practical and meaningful change. So I look forward to working with many of you over the next few months and years to take action and to find practical and meaningful change. I'll hand over now to Paul Power, our CEO, to reflect on the conference and also talk about the future.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, as we've mentioned previously, our goal with the Refugee Alternatives Conference has always been to shift the focus away from of the discussion about refugee issues from the people who traditionally accepted as the subject experts to people who have expertise, but actually whose expertise is also based on personal experience and community experience. And I think for us at the Refugee Council of Australia, we've been trying to get better over 10 or 15 years at the ways in which we work with people who've been refugees on working for change in refugee policy. I think you know, it was pretty clear 15 years or so ago that the refugee sector was a long way behind, you know, many other areas of social policy in Australia in the inclusion, involvement, and leadership of people with lived experience. I mean, if you think about, you know, in the early 2000s, whether or not it would have been regarded as acceptable for an organisation focusing on Indigenous issues to be led entirely by non-Indigenous people. You'd have to say that the Indigenous sector had moved on from that probably 20 or 30 years earlier. Similarly, with the disability sector, there were many people in disability services and in prominent roles in disability advocacy who had lived and living experience of disability. And yet in the refugee sector in Australia, and even more so outside of Australia, there were very few of the people who had experience of being refugees who were playing any serious prominent roles in leadership, and particularly leadership in advocacy. And I think, you know, a lot has changed over the years, and certainly our small organisation has tried to play a part, but always being conscious of the fact that at any point we need to do better. When I joined the organisation in 2006, one of the beacons of hope that I saw was the relationship between the Centre for Refugee Research at University of New South Wales and the Australian National Committee on Refugee Women. And so from that point, you know, we, as the Refugee Council of Australia, tried to replicate some of what the Centre for Refugee Research and ANCOR were doing, and providing opportunities for people who had been refugees themselves to advocate with us on issues which mattered to refugee communities. And what we learned very quickly, of course, was our collective advocacy gained in credibility and gained in depth. And I think, you know, over the past 15 years, it's been a matter of us, you know, learning bit by bit how to advocate more effectively. And in many ways, that a significant part of that is for people like me to actually take a step back and create opportunities for people who have direct experience, fresh perspectives, deeper perspectives, to take a more prominent role in public discussion. And we're still journeying towards that. So when we decided to organise an annual conference in 2016, we decided that that we would only do it for you know, the specific purpose of trying to play our own small way in contributing to a reshaping of the debate. So the conference from the start, from the first one in February 2017 at the University of New South Wales, has been called Refugee Alternatives, because we're actually looking at alternative perspectives on refugee issues, and also looking at constructive alternatives that those of us who weren't in government, who actually could affect. And so from the beginning, we set out to bring people who normally wouldn't be given the opportunity to do anything other than to share their personal story, to actually create platforms for people with lived experience of forced displacement to actually speak about policy issues in a way that we hadn't seen too much of before. And over the past 5 years, that has grown with each conference, and we've tried to get better. In the first conference in 2017, 40% of our presenters were people with lived experience of forced displacement, and that's grew in subsequent years to just over 50%, to 60% in the past 2 years, and to 70% this year. And also this year's conference has been planned by 3 Refugee Council staff who are of refugee background themselves, which is the first time that the whole leadership of the project is actually being led by people who have not only expertise, but actually also direct personal experience and a deeper community understanding of the issues. I think also over the past 5 years, we've seen changes in different ways. I mean, I think the conference has contributed a little bit. I wouldn't overestimate the influence that this conference has had, but it's certainly been part of a process of change. At the first conference in 2017, there was the launch of the Refugee Communities Advocacy Networks in New South Wales and Victoria. In 2018, one of our guest speakers was Osama Salem from the Network for Refugee Voices, a Syrian refugee living in Europe, who we were working with at that stage in supporting the development of the Global Summit of Refugees, which actually happened a few months after the 2018 conference. At the 2019 conference, Najiba Wazifadost reported on the work that had happened in the previous 12 months to hold the Global Summit of Refugees and the Asia Pacific Summit of Refugees, and how those 2 summits were actually leading to the beginnings of a global refugee-led network and the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees. In 2019, also we had at our conference in Adelaide a workshop on strengthening national refugee-led advocacy, where people who were refugee background themselves got together to talk about how a national refugee-led advocacy structure could be developed. And our colleague at the time, Shakufa Tahiri, was involved in helping to coordinate that. And then over the following 12 months leading up to last year's conference in Brisbane, members of different communities who came together at that dialogue in Adelaide were involved in the development of what is now the National Refugee-Led Advisory and Advocacy Group, NRAG. So I think, over 5 years, and of course NRAG is having its second national gathering tomorrow, virtually, unfortunately, but certainly having its gathering tomorrow as a follow-up to the original gathering of people which occurred in Brisbane in February last year. We've also seen, in terms of the way in which organisations in our sector work together on campaigns, that there's been progress. Our first gathering, while the Refugee Council of Australia was focused on working with organisations that are involved in direct services to refugees and asylum seekers, one of the gaps which was identified in 2016 was that there's a broader refugee campaign sector which was less cohesive, and that as a national umbrella body that we're probably in a better position than most to try to draw people together for a discussion about how collective advocacy on refugee issues could be improved. And I have to admit that the first gathering in 2017 was a fairly tense gathering because people who hadn't worked together before and actually had probably more different perceptions of what the perspectives that others were bringing to campaigning on refugee issues. And those perceptions needed to be broken down through working together. And I think over the past 5 years, we're actually seen a real progression. 12 months later, that gathering was refining a platform for change, which then became the platform that we collectively took to the 2019 federal election. And work is obviously continuing and on Monday, we had Kelly coordinated a gathering of organisations involved in campaigning to look at where we take things from here. We've also seen, over those 5 years, progress on other issues. In 2018, we had, as one of our conference sessions, a discussion on community sponsorship. And in fact, Amir Taginia, who was one of the people affected by offshore processing, who'd been settled to Canada through community sponsorship, spoke along with Wayne Taylor, an Australian expat living in Canada, who was involved in his sponsorship. And over the past 3 conferences each year, we've had a further development of the ideas about community sponsorship, which of course have led this month in the formalisation of Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia, as a new entity to push forward on a community sponsorship model. Also, simultaneously, over the past 18 months, we've been part of a broad alliance of people in Australia and Canada to work on community sponsorship of refugees from PNG and Nauru to Canada. And as of last week, we've collected $3.1 million in donations from Australians, which is an amount significantly more than our organisation's normal budget. And to date, sponsorship applications have been put forward for 139 refugees and 100 separated family members. So 239 refugee sponsorship spots in Canada are currently being considered by the Canadian government, and we're hoping that the first resettlements will be happening soon. So there's been, an important development over 5 years. There's also been discussion on issues which weren't seriously on the table back in 2017, and I think consulting with and seeking guidance from First Nations people on the way forward for engagement, for refugee communities and Australians of all backgrounds, I think has been an important discussion which has grown, and also, much greater recognition of the rights of LGBTQI refugees, and also the issues of intersectionality, which affect forcibly displaced people in a whole lot of different ways. So, I think, when thinking about the future, we've actually decided at this point not to plan the next Refugee Alternatives Conference. I mean, one of the challenges for us as an organisation which survives on public donations and membership fees, which receives no government funding, and is that an exercise such as this is pretty time intensive, and there is a lot of need for us to be very, very active as we possibly can on the sorts of issues that have been discussed today, of destitution, of asylum seekers in the community, of the need to end temporary protection, of the need for more effective engagement by Australia on refugee protection issues in the region and the like, to restart the refugee and humanitarian program. So, so we're not planning a Refugee Alternatives Conference in 2022, but what we actually are looking at doing is taking some of the best things that we've seen from the last couple of days and converting them into webinars on perhaps a quarterly basis. I think, so the format of the discussion yesterday afternoon about temporary protection, is a great model for us to be able to bring together somebody, a couple of people who are directly affected, who actually also have very clear things to say about policy alternatives, along with others, to look at what the current situation is and how we can move collectively forward. I mean, that is a great model for us to be able to bring people together and continue to do so on key issues on a regular basis. So, so I just wanted to let you know that, we will be inviting you to participate in our regular webinars as we organise them, and we really, really appreciate your involvement and support over the past 5 annual conferences, and feel that these conferences and the gathering of all of us, and particularly the perspectives that people with lived experience have brought to the discussion has changed things in a way that we are collectively further ahead than we were back in 2017 when the first conference was held at University of New South Wales at the beginning of
Thank you very much, Paul. I may have missed your passing it over. Is that where we're at? Just want to confirm you're finished. A thumbs up will do.
Yeah, I don't know whether Rebecca, we're going to just go to any of the feedback that we'd had from people on the Q&A.
Yes, I'm more than happy to read that out for everybody. Did Rebecca or Kelly wanted to say anything else? Are you happy for me to continue?
Great.
Yeah, please go ahead, Kween.
Thank you. Thanks again to everyone. I would also like to just add a bit of my own reflection for the last couple of days. I look to the children, the future leaders. It's really important, and it's really been great to see the leadership come from people with lived experience. And I think, looking at the children who are growing up here and, giving them the best and correct narratives about, why people, how people become refugees, why people flee, why people can't stay in their own countries, why they, go into forced displacement, I think is an important step for future leadership as well from young people who are coming up. And I'm also privileged, lucky that my children attend a school that is that respects these conversations and delivers them as an importance to in their curriculum at school. And so and another thing I'd also like to reflect on is I listen to a program called Democracy Now! Every day, and Amy Goodman always talks about, I hear a lot about, where refugees are ending up, what's happening, boats and all these, really tragic circumstances. And I think the media that we're receiving here, especially on a mainstream level, is not giving us the real truth about what's happening to people. And so that's an area that I would also like to see more of is, within the media space, so that people are getting the best information. Like from what we've seen today, and I think the idea of the webinars is a really good start. And I'd also like to just say thank you to everyone. And it's been a pleasure to host this conference for the last couple of days. Just meeting everybody and just seeing how many fantastic people are out there, who are on the ground, who are helping those who are left behind. And I'd like to also just read a few of the Q&A, the comments from the people who have tuned in today. I'm looking up because I'm on a second screen where I could see better. There's a reflection from Helen. She says it's good that Deng is reaching out to his Sudanese community to assist them. Charlotte says, I've learned so much, it's difficult to choose one. I found it interesting to reflect on the sector moving from informal to formal and how we can support communities to achieve this. I've got so much inspiration and in-depth knowledge. Thank you for this great opportunity to learn and reflect. Monique says the panel on Chevs and TPVs yesterday was incredibly moving and informative, especially Salim's personal insight. It is incredibly appreciated. Aniel says, I am grateful for the work that Refugee Alternatives is offering, a real alternative to what the government is offering. An anonymous attendee says, what are some practical steps we can take to help reframe refugee communities as assets and resilient contributions rather than threats and vulnerable people? And I feel like that was definitely covered throughout the conversations, but please feel free to add to the chat box if anybody has a comment or respond within the Q&A text box. The way Refugees Alternatives discussions are creating a bridge between First Nations and refugees is so useful, as it creates a space to be richly different from typical silo multiculturalism offered by government initiatives, grant specifications, and offers a uniquely and constructive way to do holistic cross-cultural work. Just on the back of that, I'd also like to say I really found it moving, and that we also heard from someone from Papua New Guinea. That was the first time I myself has, heard any reflections about how, how refugees are and Papua New Guineans themselves in that country are dealing with everything. And so I think that was really, another takeaway I have. Monique says, also the sessions on race, power and privilege was fantastic and powerful. Thank you also to Deng for his raw insights into coronavirus as a war and how it is reinforcing further oppression in a number of ways. Shabazz says, I really would like to highlight two thoughts that I think were very powerful. Not putting refugees only in a box of trauma and to make their whole life identity about what they have been through due to certain situations. And her second reflection was the safety of refugees is not only that they are away from any form of violence and persecution that they fled their country from, but also it is about ensuring that they have a basic rights in hosting in a hosting country to enable them to live their life with dignity. Otherwise, they just experience another form of unsafety and they experienced in their home country. John says Kelly's summing up could be the base of us to lobby the politicians, both sides, and encourage churches, businesses, organizations, and communities to have as their narratives about refugees and asylum seekers in the community as people who can make contributions even right now in the current situation. Anonymous person says, how do we change the system from the bottom when we're not the ones in power making decisions? And I say it's all about the children. Look to the children, and what we teach them now will reflect on how they use their leadership in the future. COVID-19 has been a huge challenge to everyone, but it has been amazing to see so much resilience and rising to challenge refugee and asylum seeker communities have shown. Also, the support and donations raised in the last financial year excelled and outdid previous years, showing that there is a lot of support out there in the community, as many Australians feel at odds with cruel treatment and policies by our government. And I'd also like to add and shout out the Addison Road Community Centre in Marrickville, who were also, very active and opened up an emergency relief centre, which, help people who, on temporary visas or, international students, everyone who was not able to access the government support as part of, another example of community-led initiatives and support. The information, Lindsay says, the information given by presenters about situations of Rohingya refugees and asylum seekers and refugees in Indonesia and PNG was very important. When our governments talk about the responsibilities in the Asia Pacific region, this doesn't seem to include these groups, but it should do. I won't read all of them because we are going to run out of time. But yeah, please do. There's more in the chat box there. One that just got in, I'll read the last one. I think that's important. It has been Helen says, it's been good to hear the stories and great to be grateful for the way refugees have contributed to our society, having faced challenges and come through the other side, then working to make it better for others, and see that what ways really answers the individual's needs they are well aware of. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in, insights, energy, and also positivity. I'd like to announce the winners of the cookbook. We have, drumroll, Zoe from UNSW, Graham from Amnesty, and Kiet. You'll be contacted by someone who will send out the books to you. So congratulations, and I hope you cook some amazing meals. Remember to click the evaluation links to give feedback for the whole conference. You can even copy and paste some of those comments in there too, because they're really insightful. And the link, and it will only take a couple of minutes, a link to the Refugee Council of Australia strategic. We are going to finish off with a performance that I've put together for you all. So please don't go anywhere. Don't sign off yet. Yeah, I'd like to dedicate this performance to people who have lost their lives trying to survive cross countries, to people who are in detention, to people who are not able to access any services or who are being affected by this coronavirus lockdown all over the world, and most importantly to the future children who are born as refugees, who are born in camps, who that's all they know. And I just want to send a positive message out to the future. And if there's anything else anyone would like to say to wrap up, and thanks again to all the sponsors, to the Whitlam Institute and to Refugee Council of Australia for hosting this for the last couple of days. And thank you. Here we go. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Queen.
Mulembe, my name is Kween G, and it's been a pleasure to host the last couple of days with you for the 2021 Refugees Alternative Conference brought to you by the Refugee Council of Australia. Once again, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we meet. I'm coming to you from the Gadigal people, the land of the Gadigal people, and I'd like to extend further respects to the people and the traditional custodians of the land on which you are on. I'd like to finish the conference with a performance. These are some of my messages, my stories. This first one is called The Root, and I'll be performing it in a cappella form, poetry. I'm of the many who were born, of the ones who must flee, in the name of saving the family tree. Branches break, the root. What happens to the root when the branches break? Where is my story? Flying in the air, tears of a mother, baby she bared and nurtured from the womb, gone. God is indeed a Black woman when I think of you. I know you came back in me through delivery, you spiritually, visually, laid your eyes on my son. My story made me a mum. You did it again, granted my long and yearning wish. As a little girl, I always wanted to know this. The feeling of having a mother and daughter love, that's a gift. The root, hair root, grow like tree roots. The root, branching out, collecting my story is no typical glory. My story, I should know my story. Before me, the grands and grands before me. What is my story? Right now, it's that I'm pissed. I'm sick of seeing this narrative, constantly leaving the continent. Poverty, war, education, whatever the reason, it's appalling. The numbers that leave to believe our sacred homelands don't want us. There is not enough for us. Pretend we got freedom in the 60s. The master's language is still the national language. How can we be free? The root. We don't know our story. Look to figures, images that don't fit us. I think somebody tricked us, that savior behavior never did us any favors. I say this on captured land, that's the truth. The root, hair root, grow like tree roots. The root, branching out, collecting my story is no typical glory. My story, I should know my story. Before me, the grands and grands before me. What is my story? Unlearning, press and delete, revealing no defeat. The time must come. The stories must not rerun. The theft of ancestry must not repeat as we piece our steps in peace. Come in peace. When disrupting whiteness. Whiteness disrupting Blackness was not and is not in peace. Remain hospitable. The times we are in is critical to tell our own stories. We gotta tell our own stories. You gotta tell your own stories. One hand in the air, it's deeper than respect. Let's do this for the fallen ones and know we don't forget. One hand in the air, it's deeper than respect. Let's do this for the fallen ones and know we don't forget. The root, hair root, grow like tree roots. The root, branching out, collecting my story is no typical glory. My story, I should know my story. Before me, the grands and grands before me. What is my story. Thank you. Black girl magicians, 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 black girl magicians. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Women, wisdom, vision, rhythm, royal, loyal, soulful, joyful. Women, wisdom, rhythm, women, royal, loyal, soulful. We are joyful, yeah. We are the makers of our own destiny, manifesting life just how it should be. We are the makers of our own destiny, power in our mind, knowledge to set we free. I dedicate this to you, all of you, everything you've been through. Know it's true in time, good things will come to you. You deserve it, more than perfect, you're worth it. Birthed it, Mother Earth did. Walk the thin surface, you're unbreakable. On another level, never want to settle. Unacceptable, not accepting, protesting, disrupting, confronting, saying something. In the name of love, love healing for everything that's living. Stop surviving, start living. Be, slay, never stop praying for the freedom fight. The givers of light will unite. Givers of light will unite. Magicians, transform the vision. Magicians, transform the vision. All my black girl magicians. 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 Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Kindness for weakness. Silence for speechless. No weakness, never speechless. The elements must get along. We are the elements we must get along. Each one teach us. Universe reach us, protect us, and gather the spells. The well, the shells, breaking the spell. All will be well as we're breaking the spell. Yeah, yeah. We are the makers of our own destiny. Manifesting life just how it should be. We are the makers of our own destiny. We got the power in our mind. We got the knowledge to set we free. What's on my black girl magicians? Black girl magicians. Yes, girl magicians. Black girl magicians. Black girl magicians. Black girl magicians. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I'd like to send a shout out and dedicate this to my sister Drea, who collaborated on this song. Thank you. It's no coincidence, there's been a high vibration felt. The past has brought us in line. We must carry on the message, the healing, the solidarity. We've all been moved in the same way by the resistance, by the existence. Everyone in this image is a vessel. Carry on, carry on. Hold the light of resistance, stories of persistence. Carry on the wisdom, these days we are living no difference. We've been warned there's a war, how long will we mourn? Bodies gone, people torn, too much going on. Target detained, deport, you keep us strong, yourself the drugs, put you in the system. Still going missing, still in the prison, still killing for existing, kicking in the building. We must carry the light, yeah. Know you're shining so bright. Take down the veneration. Carry on, carry on, carry on. Keep rising. There's nothing you and me. Shit's confusing me. I serve community. We can't bring unity. Repeating history. You're always shooting me. Artifact shooting me. Coming peace, fix and peace. It's nothing new to me. It's confusing me. I serve community. We can't bring unity. Repeating history. You're always shooting me. Artifact shooting me. Coming peace. My existence is resistance. My existence is the vision. My existence my existence. How can I social distance my existence? My existence, my existence. Continuously consistent, been a victim. My existence in the system. Criminally convicted, my existence. Continuously conflicted, my existence. Depicted in narratives of savages. My existence transcribed my existence.
We must carry the light.
We must carry the light, yeah.
Brilliant, shining so bright.
Shining bright.
So take down the bitter mission. Carry on, carry on, carry on. Keep rising.
It's nothing new to me. It's confusing me. I serve community. We can't bring unity. Repeating history. You always shooting me. Artifact. Me coming keep rising. It's nothing new to me. It's confusing me. I serve community. We can't bring unity. Repeating history. You always shooting me. Artifact. Looking me coming peace.
We must carry the light. We must carry the light.
Come on, wave your hands from side to side with me. Yeah.
Take down the bitter
Shake
mission.
it down, all the way down, dismantle the system.
Carry on, carry on, carry on, keep rising.
Thank you very much. It's a message of solidarity. Thank you very much. Once again, my name is Kween G. Kibone. I come from the Bugishu people in Uganda, and I'd like to thank you all for hanging out with me and enjoying some of this special music. Peace, love, and unity.